In this guide, I'll be teaching all about Minecraft's strongest weapon, the mace. I'll be showing you the basics, how to use it effectively, and even some advanced techniques that you can utilize to get the edge over your opponent. To begin with, let's start with a quick rundown. What is the mace? The mace is undeniably the strongest weapon in Minecraft, being able to instantly pop totems of undying or kill players if used correctly. If you have somehow never heard of the mace, the entire premise is that it deals more damage the further that you fall, and this is further enhanced by its enchantments and different techniques, but we'll get into that later. If you don't know how to get the mace, I would recommend checking out some of these videos to get an idea, as I won't be covering that in this guide. Now that you understand what the mace itself is, we can move on to how to use it. This section of the video will be split up into various parts, outlining each item you would generally use in mace PvP, why it's used, and how to use it. For that, I'll use my own hotbar as an example, starting with the sword. You might be thinking, why is there a sword in a mode that's all about mace? And the reason for that is something called attribute swapping. An attribute swap is an extremely essential part of mace PvP, in which you begin by holding your sword, then hit and swap to the mace at the exact same time. What this does is it transfers the base attributes of the sword onto the mace, being its damage and cooldown. What does this mean? This means that not only is your mace fully charged when you hit, but it raises its base damage from 6 to 8. Keep in mind, the enchantments on the sword do not matter. Only the mace's enchantments will be used when performing this, so don't go out of your way to max out your sword just for this. Moving on, we have the Density Mace. Now, the Density Mace is the weapon you will be most frequently using in mace PvP, but firstly, let's quickly run over what Density even is. Density is an enchantment for the mace ranging from levels 1 to 5, and essentially is sharpness but for the mace. But not quite. What Density does is it enhances the mace's damage even more the further you fall. If you were to fall from just 4 blocks with an unenchanted mace, well, that would do 15 hearts of damage. But if you were to add Density 5, the damage would go all the way up to 22.5 hearts. And this difference only grows with more height. Now that we understand the basics of what the Density Mace is, let's look at how to use it. The absolute most basic way to deal damage with the mace is to wind charge upwards, fall down, and attribute swap from the sword to the Density Mace. This normally isn't enough to pop or kill an opponent, but it will do heavy damage. Another basic way to get hits on your opponent is what's called a dive bomb, where you wind charge up and glide down with your Elytra to make up the distance between you and your enemy, and then you unequip your Elytra to get the hits on them. This is a little bit tricky to time and does require you to know your keybinds quite well. Quick side note, it is very recommended to make custom keybinds for mace PvP, as reaching numbers such as 5, 6, 7 and onwards can get quite hard, and scrolling is not a good option. Now that we've covered the absolute basics of Density Mace, let's move on to the mace's greatest enemy, the shield. A shield is one of the best counters to the mace, as there is no way for the mace itself to hit through a shield. This makes it an incredibly strong defensive option, as you can completely negate dive bombs or normal slam attacks, but keep in mind that the shield has a delay of 250 milliseconds, meaning that if you shield just a little too late, it will look like the enemy hits through your shield, when in actuality it's just a fault of the shield itself. It is also important to note that your ping on the server will add to this delay, so if you have poor internet and are playing at 100 milliseconds, you will have to hold the shield a little bit earlier to block an attack. Remember, not only you have a shield, but your opponent too, so it is important to know how to counter it. The most basic form of counter is to just disable the enemy shield with an axe and then go for your attack, as the disable lasts for 5 seconds. But this is not always so effective, because the enemy can just pearl or fly away. The second method to counter the shield is what's known as a backstab, wherein you fall or fly towards your opponent and at the very last second turn to hit behind them. This can be incredibly strong, as it's difficult to respond to and will normally result in a pop or kill if done from a good height. The third and final counter I will go over in this section is known as shield draining. This method is generally frowned upon and is seen as cheap because of how easy it is to do, and the fact that it leaves your opponent without a shield. But in essence, you want to fall as close to the ground as possible and then spam 3 to 5 clicks as quickly as you can with the Density Mace. This will do huge durability damage to the opponent's shield, and if done well, it can break it in just a few attempts. Now that we've covered the basics of shield and how to counter it, next is the Breach Mace. Yes, there are 2 maces in this kit, and each of them have their own use cases. Again, I'll quickly go over what Breach does. Basically, Breach is the second main enchantment for the mace, ranging from levels 1 to 4. And instead of doing more damage directly, Breach negates 15% of enemy armor per level, up to a maximum of 60%. This means that in most scenarios, the Breach Mace will be doing less damage than the Density Mace, so it is generally recommended to only use the Breach Slam attack if your height is less than around 8 blocks. The main strength of the Breach Mace is when it comes to ground play. Ground play, as opposed to aerial play, is essentially just SMP PvP, but you occasionally use the Breach Mace. The way you want to use the Breach Mace in ground play is by using attribute swapping, or what is known as Breach Swap. Once again, this will take the 8 damage from the Netherite Sword and apply it to the Breach Mace, meaning it will also reduce the enemy armor effectiveness by 60%. This can be incredibly strong and can kill a full Prot 4 Netherite player in just 3 to 4 hits. The Breach Mace can also be used in tandem with the Density Mace for something that's known as a double tap or D-Tap. To perform a D-Tap, you must first be flying. It is recommended to crouch while flying, as crouching makes you always able to deal critical damage while using an Elytra. And contrary to how you would normally unequip your Elytra, the first mace hit wants to be just a standard breach hit. After that, you can then swap to your chest plate and hit with the Density Mace. This is very hard to pull off, as it requires very fast switching, but if done correctly, it can pop and kill an opponent instantly, so it's very, very strong. With the Breach Mace checked off and out of the way, let's move on to healing. In most forms of PvP, your main form of healing will come from golden apples, as they give 2 absorption hearts and 5 seconds of regeneration too. Not only that, but they give 4.5 bars of saturation. Wow. To quickly touch on saturation, it is a hidden bar that basically determines how much you will heal from eating certain foods. You can see this bar with a mod such as Apple Skin, and when PvPing, you always want your saturation to be full to make sure you heal as much as possible. How do we know when to heal and how to heal effectively? Knowing when to heal comes down to the PvP mode and also your personal playstyle, but in Mace PvP it is generally recommended to heal whenever you get time to do so. If you're mid-fight and you're around 4 to 5 hearts, it's generally a good option to disengage and heal up. Some basic ways to get away from your opponent and be able to heal include pearling away. This is very basic and can sometimes be risky if your opponent decides to pursue and continue attacking, but the second way is to launch up into your Elytra and heal while flying. This makes it much harder for the opponent to chase and hit you, and gives you a good amount of time to heal. While flying, it is also recommended to check the status of your potions, and this can be done with a mod like Status Effect HUD. You always want your strength and speed potions to be active, so it is a good idea to repot and re-equip totems while you have this distance from your opponent. If you are flying, there are 2 methods to repot midair. My preferred method being throwing your potions and then immediately throwing a wind charge to intercept them. You want to make sure you're looking directly forward for this, otherwise it's easy to miss. The second method is quite situational and involves you flying slowly into a wall and splashing your pots against the wall. I don't personally like this method for 2 reasons. First being that you have to fly into a wall, making it easy for you to take damage, and the second being that it leaves you very vulnerable to getting hit, especially if your opponent is chasing. Next, we have pearls. There are a lot of things you can do with pearls, besides just using them to escape or dodge. The most common tech you'll see using pearls is what's known as a pearl catch. A pearl catch is where you throw your ender pearl into the air and quickly throw a wind charge after it. The hitbox of the 2 will collide and trigger the pearl, giving you a good amount of height. This can be done both vertically and horizontally, but because of pearls being affected by gravity, the aim for a horizontal pearl catch is quite hard and requires a bit of practice or very fast switching. Another piece of pearl tech that you'll see a lot is a grapple. This is exactly what it sounds like, pearling to your opponent. This is useful because it can close the distance, allowing you to get a hit, and can also be hard to predict. Aiming a grapple also takes a bit of practice because for some reason, ender pearls only collide with the bottom half of a player's hitbox, so they can be very easy to miss. You can also perform a bit more of a niche kind of pearl tech, which is called a force grapple or player catch, where you wind charge your opponent's feet to launch them into the air and grapple to them. However, this is quite hard to perform in game, as not only is it not easy to launch your opponent due to them moving a lot, but you also have to aim the grapple afterwards. But this is very hard to predict and can be useful. Finally, the last kind of pearl tech I will cover is actually split into 2, as they are quite similar. The first being just regular pearl chasing. If you notice that your opponent has missed a pearl, rather than fighting them, it can be beneficial to chase that pearl and hit them as soon as they teleport. This can easily result in an instant pop because it is quite hard to see coming. The second part is known as a pearl intercept and is much more situational, but involves catching your opponent's pearl, either with a wind charge or your own body, to teleport them to where you want them to be. Again, very hard to predict, but also very hard to perform. Moving on, we finally get to the axe. The axe in Mace has basically only one purpose, disabling shields. While you can use the axe to attribute swap to the mace because of its 10 damage as opposed to the sword's 8, it's quite situational, and definitely do not be tempted to use the axe to breach swap, as the axe's longer cooldown results in lower DPS overall. Since I've already covered the main shield disable methods in the shield section of this video, I will go over the last remaining type here, known as a stun slam. Now, as a quick preliminary for this part, I recommend you watch this video by Marlow that explains tick lockout and Hotbar priority, as it makes stun slamming much easier. But to make it simple, you want your axe to be further down your hotbar than your mace. For example, you see my axe is in slot 7 and my mace is in slot 2. To perform a stun slam, you want to fall, and before you hit the ground, disable the shield with the axe and then swap at the mace to hit, so 2 clicks. Also, it is very recommended to have hitboxes on for this, and at all times during Mace PvP really. The timing here is very tight, and only gets harder the faster you're going. There are many ways to perform these 2 clicks, and I'll go through some of them quickly, starting with the least effective. The first method is just clicking twice. This isn't great because it's very hard to do quick enough and easy to miss time, but if you practice enough, you can hit basic stun slams with around 25% accuracy. The next method is butterfly or drag clicking, and as you'd imagine, clicking more and faster makes it easier to time. This technique takes a little time to get used to, but can be vastly more consistent. My personal favorite method, and comedically named, is known as toe stun slam. To perform this method, people will put a second mouse under their desk and use their toe to do the second click. This is unironically one of the best methods of stun slamming, as it allows you to input the two clicks very quickly after each other and can become very consistent with practice and can even be used to do fast dive bomb stun slams. Finally, the last method, and probably the most common, is the debounce click, not to be confused with clicking twice. This is a hardware reliant method, as you'll need a mouse with a low debounce time that can perform double clicks, such as the glorious Model O. But as far as I know, this is one of the most consistent methods for stun slamming because of how close together the click inputs are. Finally, we have the very last section of this video, Elytra and Windcharges. I've combined these two together because when it comes to Windcharges, I've already spoken about a lot of the main uses, so there's not really much to cover. We'll start with Elytra. A quick note to mention is that the Elytra hitbox is very small compared to the normal player hitbox, so either keep hitboxes on or aim for the feet. Now, I'm sure in standard vanilla Minecraft you're used to using rockets to fly with Elytra, and while that is possible with Mace, which I'll speak about at the end of this video, in a lot of Mace PvP servers you will only have Windcharges. The very first thing I want to talk about is known as an alien launch, coined by the player Alien Overdose, where you will equip your Elytra, dive almost directly at the ground, look fully down, windcharge, and spam space before looking back up at around 20 to 35 degrees for the best height. This launch is incredibly powerful and can give you a lot of height and distance, and if performed at a lower angle, you use to effectively dash towards your opponent. While in the air, if you're low on height, you can perform the same inputs of looking at the ground, windcharging, and spamming space to relaunch yourself back into the air. When using Elytra, it is very important to keep note of the durability and make sure not to waste it, because it can be very crucial to preserve in longer fights. Next is a small section about Windcharges. As I said, because I've already gone over most of the ways to use these, there's only really a few small things I can say. The first being hitting your opponent with Windcharges while they're attempting to dive bomb, as seen in this clip by Chompza. This tech can be very annoying, as it stops all the momentum from the flight and is often called Ragebait tech. However, you must be careful while doing this, as if your opponent is going too fast, it is easy to miss, and you're essentially just giving them a free hit. Lastly, in conjunction with the previous point, you can hit Windcharges back or away from you, and this is the only real easy way to counter Ragebait tech, though it can be a little annoying to do. And with that concludes my full Mace PvP guide. Obviously, there are more techniques you can perform, and I'll have a video by AlexOinks linked in the description that goes over basically every single technique in Mace PvP. But just before this video ends, I want to talk about one last thing in Mace, which is firework rockets. You may have seen this in Crystal PvP or from creators such as Wembu, and it is a very strong technique that can be used to shred opponents very quickly. The reason I've left this until the end is because rockets are not included in the general Mace PvP kit for most servers, such as Mindmen, MC PvP, which is the tier list server, Cat PvP, etc. But I will do a quick rundown of how to rocket Mace. To start off, you want to be using flight duration 3 rockets, and you'll see why in a moment, but basically you want to fly up into the air, equip your chest plate, and turn around to face your opponent, and then re-equip your Elytra. Don't forget to press space here to fly again, and then fly down quickly to your opponent. Then, just as you would perform a normal dive bomb, equip your chest plate, hit with the mace, and then fly away again. This can be done horizontally or vertically, and it's one of the fastest ways to blaze through totems and kill an opponent. Hi, thanks for watching until the end. I hope this guide has helped you and you now understand how to properly utilize Minecraft's strongest weapon, the mace. If you'd like to see more content like this, or there's something I missed, please let me know in the comments. Likewise, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or consider subscribing. Bye!